Hey everybody, it's Jackie Luqman, and I'm doing something a little different. I am cleaning my camera. There we go. That might be a little better. I'm trying this specifically and exclusively from YouTube because I'm really just tired of Facebook and trying to connect everything and on three different platforms, and it's just a pain in the behind. But this week has been really difficult, not just because of the really sad news of Anthony Bourdain's suicide. And I know people are, looking at that and saying, well, why is that a big deal? And I'm seeing some really disturbing comments about that on social media. But, also for personal reasons, this week has been difficult. And and I think these things that we individually struggle with in this activist community tie directly into the kinds of issues that Anthony Bourdain was actually pretty famous for highlighting. See, people think of Anthony Bourdain as a rich white chef who got even more rich and more famous from his television show, where he traveled the world and he sampled cuisine. But if anybody had ever really watched his show, Parts Unknown, um, they would know that Bourdain did a lot more than just sample the cuisines of the world. He raised issues of inequality, systemic inequality. He raised issues of imperialism and militarism in foreign countries that the United States have been responsible for. He held a particular and well justified hatred of Henry Kissinger when he visited Cambodia, and he saw what was left of Cambodia after Kissinger's illegal bombing campaign of that country, and how the people of Cambodia continue to suffer. He went to Congo. Anthony Bourdain went to Congo ostensibly to talk about the food of the Congo people, but he went there and highlighted the decades of civil war and the impact that it still has on the people in the Congo and how they continue to fight and how they continue to try to survive and even thrive and move on past what is still being done to them by Western imperial powers. He went to places like Detroit and Pittsburgh and other American cities that used to be predominantly Black and very thriving, almost some middle class Black enclaves, middle class as far as Black income is concerned, and how those areas have been gentrified and the residents pushed out of their neighborhoods because they can't afford to live there anymore. And he went to these neighborhoods to talk about the hip new restaurants that are opening up in these places that are serving this delicious food. But when he goes there, when he went there to talk about these trendy new eateries, he also talked to the former residents. He also talked to the embattled poor residents who are fighting to stay in their neighborhoods against a wave of wealthy, mostly white people who want them gone because they want their property. And he would go to the trendy restaurants and sample their food. Yes, that's absolutely true. But he would also go to the neighborhood holes in the wall rather. He would also go to the neighborhood carryouts. He would go to the families that have that would be selling dinners to make a little extra money. And he would talk to these people and he would highlight their struggle against inequality and oppression in neighborhoods that generations of their families came up in. and that they can no longer afford to stay in. So Anthony Bourdain used his privilege to highlight issues of inequality and oppression and imperialism around the world. And he used it, and he used food to tell that story. And I think that's noteworthy. It's also noteworthy to talk about Anthony Bourdain's struggles that most people struggle with: depression or some type of mental illness, addiction. Millions of Americans struggle with addiction, and it didn't just start with the opioid crisis. Then on top of that, you got typical family issues. I'm sure if his family was anything like my family, anything like your family, family can be crazy. And then there are the issues of just regular, life, employment, job commitments, travel time. You're not getting enough sleep. There's pressure on you to do everything. So it bothers me when I see people dismiss Anthony Bourdain's suicide as if it's not something any of us who aren't white, who aren't rich, who don't have his privilege and access. It's like it's nothing we should be concerned about. I mean, no, I didn't know the guy, but I appreciated the work he did with the privilege he had. And I recognize in him doing that work with his privilege that he became aware of what we fight every day. See, I understand how difficult it is to be quote unquote woke, to know what I do know to the level that I know it about inequality and racism and imperialism and militarism that is being perpetuated in this country and around the world by this government, ostensibly in our name. That's an incredible burden to have to know these things. And then on top of that, I have to live it, right? I have to know that I live in a white supremacist, racist society. And then when I go to work, when I go into the office, every once in a while, I experience it. To this day, I still do. I deal with people who treat me very differently because I'm not a young white college intern. So they see me and they automatically think that I am unqualified. I am not intelligent. I don't know what I'm doing, and that I either have or I will screw something up. I'm treated that way every once in a while when I go to work. And then when I go outside of work, if I go out to just social stuff, go to the movies, go shopping in certain places, I might get followed around in a store. Still happens. Depends on where I go. I'm not one of those high-end shopping type of people, real cheap. So you're not going to catch me in a Lord & Taylor, or heck, you might not even catch me in a Nordstrom. I might go to Macy's for the clearance rack, but depending on where I go, if I go far enough out of Washington, D.C., I might catch myself in one of these stores in one of the D.C., Maryland or Virginia suburbs being eyed suspiciously or followed around the store by security or by salespeople. They don't want to help me do anything, but they want to make sure I don't steal nothing. Yeah, that still happens. And then I have to deal with sexism. God forbid, don't let me take my car to the mechanic, a mechanic that's outside of my regular mechanic who knows me and who knows not to mess with me like that, who knows that I do know a little bit of something about cars. God forbid I take my car to some mechanic that's not regular and they think they can snow job me on some ridiculous repair bill that I know this car does not need. It's old, but it doesn't need $5,000 in repairs. But these men think they can mansplain some fake repairs to me and take my money. I got to deal with that. And then on top of that, then it's the regular stuff that just people deal with in life. Finances, medical bills, not having enough money to do the stuff that you want to do. And then you add on top of that intermittent depression. And then you add on top of that having to think, well, I could go to the doctor and maybe get some medication for this, but it's not covered under my insurance plan. And I really don't have the money to spare for that. Then if you make the mistake of telling people in some certain circles that sometimes you feel kind of sad and hopeless, depending on who you talk to, you'll get some messed up answers that'll make you feel even more sad and hopeless. Like, I'm sitting right now outside of a conference that I have to attend for my church denomination. Now, our church denomination is very progressive, very social and racial justice oriented. But I grew up in the Baptist culture where nobody talked about therapy. Nobody really talked about abuse. Plenty of people were abused and needed therapy, but all people ever talked about was, well, if you got problems, if you're depressed, you just need to pray and talk to Jesus. And that's why a whole lot of people who are people of faith have either taken their lives or they're miserable people and they've never enjoyed their lives. They put on this facade, this holy, sanctified facade, and they're miserable. And they're miserable to be around. And that's why sometimes people of faith take their lives. So I've had those conversations with people as I became more socially active, active as far as activism is concerned. I've had those conversations with people who I used to go to church with. And the more I learned, the more depressed I became about our chances of fighting this, any of this, especially all of it. And I've had people tell me, well, just pray because, God is in control. Pray and the Lord will give you hope. Thank God I stopped listening to those people, and I did get to a therapist when I was able to. But then other things happen in life. Relationships with people are difficult. People are difficult because people come to relationships with their own baggage, with their own stuff. And that stuff is hard sometimes. And the way people in some communities don't want to talk about depression or mental illness, they also don't want to talk about addiction, and they don't want to help people. They tell people who struggle with addiction that all you need to do is pray. And they don't want to do any real hands-on, real life work to give people the physical support they need to overcome addiction. It's a lifetime struggle. And it is not easy, but people make it even harder. And it can make you feel really hopeless when it seems like you can't get over the hump. People not understanding that part of Anthony Bourdain's story don't understand how difficult addiction is. I have seen it. I've never quite experienced it personally, but I've seen it enough to know what an enormous weight it is to bear. And I can't imagine how he must have felt knowing what he knows about suffering around the world and how little people give a damn about how other people suffer in this country and around the world, and then having to deal with his own personal demons too, and then not having a grasp on that. Maybe he relapsed, I don't know. But for us to dismiss the burden of knowing, the burden of what we call being woke, on top of everything else in life that everybody deals with, all the things that are common to all of us, then you've got to deal with knowing the truth and having no idea how to fight it, how to make it better, how to change it, how to address it, how to get people to see. And you do everything in your power that you can think of to bring awareness to these injustices against so many people that cause so much pain. And people continue not to care. I can absolutely see how somebody would feel so hopeless that they don't want to be here anymore. That's not something I can't fathom. And it's not because I have ever contemplated that myself, but I can understand. Y'all need to stop acting as if you are so much more mentally together because you haven't decided to check out of this manufactured death race, rat race yet. Who are you fooling? Who are you trying to fool? All of us are struggling. And here Anthony Bourdain is, and this my thoughts aren't even really about him. My thoughts are about us and how we completely delude ourselves into thinking that everything is okay and we're okay and we've got all this straight and we're so much better than the next person because we don't have an addiction. We're so much better than the next person because we're not depressed. We're so much better than the next person because, oh, I would never do that. That's so selfish. But when you really think about what people struggle with and what it's like to know how much people suffer, and to know that people in this country and around the world suffer the way we do because other people decided to make that happen for their profit and their benefit. If you don't understand the weight that is on a person, then I question your humanity. And then on top of that, you've got people who are trying to fight these issues where they can, how they can, raise awareness for these issues where they can, how they can, and doing the best they can with the little bit they have. And they're having to fight with people who have a bigger platform. And this is why I respect Anthony Bourdain, why I respected him so much, because he had this enormous platform and he used it not just to talk about food, but to highlight humanity and the piss poor state of a lot of humanity because of decisions other humans made. And he also highlighted how those people who are being oppressed are fighting so hard to hold on to what little bit of humanity they have left. That's why I respected that man. He told other people's truths, people who were nothing like him, that he didn't have to pay any attention to in any of his travels. He could have just gone to the 5-star restaurants in all of these locales and paid no attention to those struggling people on the other side of the tracks. living in the slums and in the ghettos and in the favelas, in the homeless encampments, being displaced in the homeless shelters, barely able to pay their mortgages and their rent. He could have ignored those people, but he used his enormous platform to highlight those people and their struggles. That's important. But can you imagine what it is like, though, to be in a space where you're an activist and you're trying to raise awareness in this new political movement to people who are experiencing oppression and struggle in a way that these people in this new political movement really don't understand anything about? And instead of these people embracing the stories of the oppressed and the struggling, they drown those voices out. They push those voices out, and they tell not only the people trying to highlight those stories, but the people themselves that you and your perspective, your stories, you people, you're not important. Our issues are important. And you're actually being divisive because you don't want to talk about our issues. So we've got to deal with that. We've got to deal with as we are fighting for our people in this progressive political movement, we've got to deal with the fact that we don't have platforms as big as those of people who are pushing conspiracy theories and alt-right racist light ideologies that so-called progressives are eating up. And meanwhile, the people we're trying to advocate on behalf of, they're just sliding further down into the cesspool of oppression and suffering. And the people with the big platforms not paying any attention. No attention to those people. You know what that's like? And then when you try to do this thing online, because it's a tool and it's a very handy tool, it's very useful, then you got to deal with racist comments, sexist comments, comments from people who are telling you that these issues are not important. And then on top of that, you've got to deal with all these well-meaning people who want to criticize you because of the foods you eat. You eat sugar, they got something to say. You drink soda, they got something to say. You eat meat, they got something to say. It's a lot. It's a whole lot to deal with. And you wonder why people decide one day, I can't do this anymore. I don't. I'm going into this conference today to see what they're going to say about how the UCC church is going to be more intentional and active in social and racial justice. They already are, but more needs to be done. So there's, and not everybody is in agreement about how these things need to be done either. Because not everybody in this building is, even though they're for racial justice, not all these people are for Black Lives Matter. Because they got some of the same weak, liberal, white, moderate complaints. Oh, they're not doing it the right way. They don't want to support Black focused policies, candidates, and platforms. Some of these people, because, well, you know, that's not including everybody. So there's a discussion that has to be had even among the religious circles that are focused on racial and social justice, on what that looks like. We got to have these arguments with these people. And they're the ones who don't like the religious right and are opposed to their misinterpretation of the faith just as much as people of non-faith have criticism for them. They have the same view. They have screwed us over and we need to do something different. The question is, what is it? What do we need to do? How do we need to do it? And how do we please everybody in this room and in this building? And we're not going to. So we got to have those discussions with those people in there. And then I come from a meeting at church on Wednesday night where I'm the moderator of my church, and I got to deal with the politics of the church, which just so unpleasant and incredible. And people make things personal that are just not. And they pile on you because you are the target. You're the person in front of the mic with the authority. And they just pile on you, treat you like garbage. And nobody knows what you're struggling with when you walk in that building. This is everywhere I go, almost every day, all the time. And this is just me, Jacqueline Luqman, just, lady from Southeast DC. This is just me. This is just my struggle. I've been to 3 countries, I think. 3. I don't have any money. I don't have a large platform. I don't have a whole bunch of people demanding my time. I don't have to juggle sponsors and be worried that I'm saying something that's going to anger somebody and they're going to take their financing away and take my livelihood from me. I don't have to worry about that. But Anthony Bourdain did. And we like to think that his money and his fame insulated him from these struggles. But I don't think they did. And I don't think they did, not because money and fame doesn't do that. I mean, sure it could if you don't care. You have the luxury of isolating yourself from the little people. When you have enough money, you move far enough away from poor people that you never have to see them. But Anthony Bourdain didn't do that. He used the platform he had, the money he had, the privilege he had to get right down there in the thick of things and tell these people's stories. And I can absolutely see why doing that and having to deal with maybe depression and maybe having to struggle with an addiction that I don't know, maybe he didn't feel like he was able to manage anymore. I can see how that became too much for him. Because there are some days that being just a regular activist is too much for me. And there is nothing in the world that can insulate you from the scrutiny and the emotional toll, the psychic toll, the mental toll, and the spiritual toll that knowing what we know about how this society really is, there's nothing that insulates you from that. There are things we can do to make carrying the burden a little bit easier. There are things we should do to help us step back from what we're doing, what we're focused on, so we can have some balance. Absolutely. But there's nothing that insulates the weight of this burden. Nothing. So for all the people who have all these criticisms about Anthony Bourdain, or people who are hurt or emotionally wounded in some way or touched in some way that he took his life because people think, well, he's rich and people commit suicide every day. I mean, most of y'all don't care about the people who commit suicide every day. Most of you don't care about what the people you know struggle with on a daily basis. So how is it all of a sudden you're offended that people are touched, that a guy who didn't have to tell the little people's story, who chose to, how is it all of a sudden you're mad because now that voice is gone And some of us understand that it might have been his care and concern for these stories that was a weight that was too much to bear. Do you understand that if you gave a damn about people in the first place, then nobody would have to carry this burden alone? If you gave a damn about people in the first place and how people are living and what people are struggling with and inequality and oppression and imperialism, if you gave a damn about these things in the first place, then none of us would have to struggle with this weight of being woke. And most of the people we know not giving a damn about the people who are being hurt. So maybe people's focus really needs to be shifted from being angry that people only talk about suicide when a famous person does it, or being angry because they didn't like that Bourdain did this, or they didn't like that this famous person did that in their life. Maybe people's focus needs to not be on who the focus is as we look at what leads a person to suicide. Maybe we should really start paying attention to people's quality of life. All people. So that people will have less of a reason to feel like it's a better idea not to even be here to deal with this than it is to stay and continue fighting. I'd like to see more of that, and less judgment against people because some of us are shocked and saddened that a very beloved voice for the voiceless in the celebration of food of all places, the most unlikely of places. Stop with your judgment about those of us who are a little bit saddened that voice is gone. Because unless you're going to pick up the mantle where he left it off, you need to keep your judgments about anybody else in this struggle to yourself.